Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and others who shall remain nameless. You know who you are. Absolutely. Yeah. The Bible flood myth is refuted not just by scientific absurdity, it's refuted by historical absurdity. It is refuted by the Egyptian culture, the Indus Valley culture in India, the Yellow River Valley culture in China, the Yangtze River Valley culture in China, the Sumerian culture in the former Iraq, and several cultures in South America. It is refuted by all these cultures which passed through the Bible flood period unscathed. And each of these cultures had its own distinct and unique pottery style that you can tell belongs to that culture and no other. They each had their own burial customs that were unique to that culture and no other. They all have their own distinct writing systems unique to that culture and no other. So you can tell this is Egyptian. You can tell this is Southern Chinese. You can tell that one is Northern Chinese. You can tell that one is Sumerian. And you can tell that one is pre-Proto-Inca. You can tell that these cultures are separate and distinct from one another. Their pottery, their burial customs, their writings, everything about them is distinctive and unique. They were not all created by Noah's family. They predated Noah's family by thousands of years. They developed and they continued through. And there is absolutely no historical biblical flood. Many of these cultures don't even have a meaningful flood myth. In South America, there is no flood myth. Instead, there is a mountain myth. These people don't have a flood myth that the Bible people can grab a hold of and say, aha! And the Chinese flood myth doesn't have 8 people, it has 1,000 people following a man named Wu. And Wu tamed the flood by building dams. And the flood was confined to a river valley. The people survived by living on a mountaintop. In southern China, there are 2 distinct flood myths. Both have a story of people surviving on a mountaintop, not in a giant magical boat. The Noah story doesn't work historically. It doesn't work in the history of these people. And we know that every calculation made by young Earth sources places the flood at 2350 BCE, approximately, plus or minus a decade. Yet this is a period when Egyptian culture was strong and stable. It is a period when the Indus Valley culture was strong and stable. It is a period when the North Chinese were strong and stable. And there's no transition, there's no break in any of these cultures. None. These cultures continue through the Bible flood period, unaffected, unchanged, undiminished. They remain strong, prosperous, healthy. They continue building monuments. They continue waging wars, and they continue collecting taxes. And this is all documented. The documents exist. And we can collate these documents with records from astronomy, because eclipses follow patterns. So we can use the eclipse record to determine there was an eclipse in year 7 of King whatever, visible from such and such city. We can go through the list of where when was there an eclipse visible from that city? And we can say, aha, 2800 BC, there was an eclipse visible from that city. Bingo, there you go. That means that that was the year 7 of King so-and-so. The eclipse record. Then there's also supernovae. Not as common, but always well documented. And these were visible around the world. So if you have a record of a new star appearing in the southern sky and being visible for 6 months in the southern sky before vanishing again, you look for a supernova remnant in the southern sky. You find one and you calculate backward to when it was bright enough to be visible, and that's the date. And sure enough, there are supernova references in all historical records, all historical cultures, that allow certain dates to be collated against each other. So that a particular date in China is cross-referenced against a particular date in Egypt, is cross-referenced against a particular date in India, and a particular date in Mesopotamia. And bingo, they all saw the same supernova at the same time. Therefore, that date is this date, this particular date. Therefore, this is a reference point for all the civilizations. And there are such dates. There are such dates. They exist and can be cross-referenced against each other. And no, a king cannot order a supernova. And there is no possible way for a king in one country to order a king in another country thousands of miles away to claim that there was a new star in the southern sky at such and such a time. It doesn't work that way. These were independent nations that had trade relations, but they were sufficiently strong that they could defend themselves, and sufficiently remote from one another that sending armies back and forth was prohibitively expensive. Very prohibitively expensive. So yeah, the whole silly flood myth is just that. It's silly and it's a myth. You can use it as a cute children's story to illustrate the power of your God. But the moment you try to present it as historical fact, you've lost all credibility. And people are going to start flocking away from your religion. And that's the problem with young earth creationists. They don't recognize how they shoot themselves in the foot. Which is unfortunate. Because, quite honestly, these people need a break. They do. But I digress. The Bible flood is refuted by the documented history of multiple cultures, each one separate and distinct, each one having no break around 2350 BCE, and no bringing in of a sudden whole new culture. It doesn't exist. And we can see the development of Egyptian culture. We can see the development of the North Chinese culture, the development of the South Chinese culture. We can see how all these civilizations developed from primitive, humble beginnings up until they developed writing. And from there, it's a matter of just following their historical records, which are plentiful, because ancient peoples wrote a lot. They documented everything. So it's not as though we don't know what was happening. We do. Because especially the Egyptians loved to document everything from the latest fashions in wigs to what the most popular embroidery styles are in a particular region as opposed to another particular region. The Egyptians documented everything. And they left those documents indelibly etched in stone. So we can read them. It's not as though it's a mystery. we've been able to decipher the Egyptian language for almost 200 years. So, young Earth creationists, get a grip. Your cult is refuted by ancient historical